Welcome everyone. I'm glad you're here to listen to this because I want to tell you something that is so wise, so profound, so deep and thoughtful that everyone in the world should hear it. Okay, this is it. Here I go. Rich people are all going to die. Now, please excuse this rather crude paraphrase of the opening verses of Psalm 49, but in essence, this is what it seems to be saying. The first 4 verses seem to promise us that some great truth is about to be revealed. My mouth will speak words of wisdom. The meditation of my heart will give you understanding. And then he tells us that rich people are going to die and that they can't use their money to purchase immortality. Well, duh. But is that such an obvious thing to say? Why does the psalmist feel he needs to say this at all? Well, as with all true wisdom, there are 2 components. Firstly, knowing, and secondly, doing. Do people know that money and wealth can't buy them eternal life? Well, yes, of course they do. Do they act as though this is the case? Well, no. But what do I mean by saying that people don't act as though money and wealth can't buy them immortality? Well, let's go back and have a look at the introduction again. The first thing I'd like to say is that Psalm 49 and Psalm 50 as well is that they take the form of a sermon. Now, in most of the other Psalms, the writer is either praying or praising. In Psalm 49, the writer is preaching. So, to whom is the psalmist preaching? Well, it would seem everyone. Hear this, all you peoples. Listen, all who live in this world, both low and high, rich and poor alike. Clearly, he feels that an excessive love of money is something that is a concern for rich and poor people. Poor people are as in much danger of desire for money and wealth as rich people are in danger of delighting in money and wealth, but we'll come back to that later. In verses 3 and 4, the psalmist tries to impress on us the seriousness of what he's about to say. He's not just going to speak something that is wise and true, but something that he seriously considered and completely believes in himself. The meditation of my heart will give understanding, and I will turn my ear to a proverb. Both of those suggest that what he's saying is inspired by God, and he's not just speaking off the top of his head. Also, I will turn my ear to a proverb shows that he includes himself as someone who needs to hear these words of wisdom from God. And finally, by saying he will expound his riddle on the harp, he's saying that he's trying to explain something that a lot of people don't understand. It's a riddle to them. And by using the harp, he's hoping that he'll be able to move them, to affect the listener emotionally and not just at an intellectual level. Okay, so if anything, by looking carefully at the introduction to Psalm 49, we have increased the sense of build-up, which, as I said, seems to be a bit over the top for a message that seems fairly obvious. What is this message that the psalmist feels that everyone in the entire world needs to hear? I'd like to look at 2 main things that he seems to be saying. Firstly, he's pointing out the foolishness of people who, in verse 6, trust in their wealth and boast in their great riches. And secondly, why people who trust in God should not be afraid or envious of the prosperity and power of wealthy people. Now, every new US banknote has words emblazoned on them, "In God we trust." Now, more than a few people have commented on the irony of putting these words on the currency of the home of rampant capitalism. It's worth pointing out that trusting in money is a powerful rival to trusting in God because money in itself involves trust. When you hand me a $10 bill, it has no intrinsic value. And feel free to hand me a $10 bill at some time. But I'm trusting that you haven't printed it yourself on your color printer. When I deposit some money in a bank, I'm trusting that it will not only be still there when I come back a few months later, but there will actually be a bit more there because I've earned interest. Maybe because money in itself inherently involves trust, the psalmist has to be incredibly blunt and to the point in why we shouldn't put our trust in wealth. Now, the psalmist doesn't muck about here. Trusting in wealth is stupid because money can't stop you dying. Not even Elon Musk, for all his billions of dollars of personal fortune, which I read somewhere apparently exceed the treasuries of some small countries, will be able to purchase immortality. But the psalmist is aware that what he's saying is a tad obvious. In verse 10, he's saying, you would have to be pretty stupid to think that money could stop you from physically dying. After all, everyone dies, whether they're wise or foolish. Likewise, everyone knows that you can't take your money with you. It says, for all can see that the wise die, that the foolish and the senseless also perish, leaving their wealth to others. Their tombs will remain their houses forever, their dwellings for endless generations. So yes, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Bill Gates, all know that they will die one day, much as that may irk them. But what do the rich do instead? Well, they try to have their memory live on forever. That's what the second half of verse 11 means. Though they had lands named after themselves. Wealthy people know that their money won't buy them immortality, but they do try to use it to create a legacy. They name things after themselves. They lavish money on their tombs to be a lasting memorial. Now, if you ever go to the university here in Newcastle, you'll wander around campus seeing signs that are usually hidden behind trees, to places like the Auchmuty Library, the Huxley Library, the Macmullen Building. Who were all these people? I don't have a clue, and nor do I suspect most of the people who passed through the uni. Were these people good people? Bad people? I don't know. Did they name these buildings after themselves, or did other people name the buildings in their honour? I don't know that either. But the point is that only the name is remembered, and even then it won't be remembered forever. So the psalmist again says in verse 12 that no matter how rich they are, they will not endure. They will not endure physically, and the memory of them will not endure as it fades and eventually disappears altogether. In this, they are no better off than animals. But there's worse news for people who trust in their riches. And notice how he shifts the description in verse 12 of people with wealth to, in verse 13, those who trust in themselves and who have followers who approve of their sayings. Just as a side note, isn't that a marvellously economical way of describing the uber wealthy in our society as those who trust in themselves and who have followers who approve of their sayings? Anyway, back to the text. If physical death were all there was at the end of life, then chasing after money and trying to use it to live on forever, at least in memory, would be just pathetic. But verse 14 shows there is a future beyond the grave, and it's not a happy one for those who have wealth and who trust in themselves. In the Old Testament, the ideas of heaven and a hell were not as well developed as by the time of the New Testament. Nevertheless, the phrases such as the upright will prevail over them in the morning strongly point to the idea that there will be a day when those who've trusted in God will be honoured, where those who've trusted in their wealth will have all the good things that they enjoyed in life stripped away from them forever. Verse 15 shows the idea of an existence beyond death even more clearly when he writes, "But God will redeem me from the realm of the dead. He will surely take me to himself." And this brings me to the third point that I wanted to make, which is why we shouldn't be afraid or envious of the power and prosperity of wealthy people. Verses 6 to 14 are pointing out the folly of trusting in wealth. Verse 15 to the end are more addressed to those who claim to trust in God, and they serve as a warning not to be afraid or envious of the wealthy. Firstly, unlike those who trust in their wealth, those who trust in God don't need to be afraid of death. The psalmist is quite convinced when he says, God will surely redeem me from the realm of the dead. He will surely take me to himself. So, you would think that the fact that those who trust in God will be spared from death would be the end of the matter. Why on earth would we fear or envy those who trust in wealth when we who trust in God are spared of the very thing that makes their lives not only futile, but ultimately tragic? But, sadly, we do remain fallen people, and the lure of wealth continues to pull us even after we've decided to put our trust in God alone. There are a number of things that could be said about verses 16 to 20, but I'd like to look especially at verse 18. Though while they live, they count themselves blessed. One of the ways we can tell whether we are really trusting in God or not is to think about what it is in life that makes us think that we've been really blessed. We all know that materialism tends to result in people wanting more and more and never being satisfied. But I think we need to be really careful to feel as though we're somehow very righteous and trusting in God if we're happy with the things that we have. In Luke chapter 12, it's worth pointing out that the rich fool is not setting out to become richer. In fact, he's reached a point in his life where he feels that he now has made enough money and he can now eat, drink, and be merry. I was wondering whether there might be a modern day version of this parable. It might go something like this. The shares portfolio of a rich Balmain financial planner produced a good dividend. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I live in a small terrace house and I have no room to store my children. This is what I'll do. I will sell up my house and build a bigger one up the coast. I'll drop back to working 3 days a week and I'll enjoy a much more relaxed lifestyle near the beach. For a long time now, there's been a lot in the media about downsizing, giving up the highly paid, high-pressure job and moving out of the city to find a simpler and more easygoing lifestyle. Maybe this is why shows like Sea Change struck such a chord with Australian TV viewers. But whether we're relentlessly chasing after money by working 12-hour days as a corporate lawyer, or whether we're sitting back sipping pina coladas enjoying the good life on the balcony of our place near the beach, in both cases we are trusting in wealth and the things of this world to make us happy. To delight in the things that money and wealth bring us without any thought for God can be just as bad as desiring wealth and money with no thought for God. Now, don't get me wrong here. Contentment with what we have is a good thing. Likewise, there are people who downsize for good reasons. For example, to spend more time with their families, or to enable them to give more time to church or other gospel ministries. But the question remains, would we be equally content with life if the material things we enjoy in life were suddenly taken away from us? Would we still consider ourselves blessed by God if all that we own, house, car, stereo, TV, were all gone? Would we really be able to say, like Job, when all his wealth and his family were stripped from him suddenly, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. But the trouble is, the wealthy seem so happy now. And what's more, we are constantly bombarded with the world's propaganda that praises those who prosper, those who are successful. We're told to look up to the wealthy, to aspire to be like them, to own what they own and wear what they wear. Remember, verse 13, that the wealthy have followers who approve of their sayings. Why do people watch shows like Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous? And why isn't there a similar show, Lifestyles of the Poor and Destitute? Who hasn't at some point in time just casually flicked through a Better Homes and Gardens magazine and sighed wistfully when we look at the nice houses of people who have more money than us? It's because the temptation to be overawed when a man grows rich is so strong that the psalmist feels he needs to remind us again of the end of prosperous sinners. Yes, they may appear happy now, but in the end they will die, and they will be no better off for having ever lived. What's more, wealthy sinners will not only die and take nothing with them, They will, in the words of verse 19, they'll join those who have gone before them, who will never see again the light of life. That's to say, they will, like their ancestors who trust in their wealth, like the fathers in whose footsteps they're following, they will be sent to a place of eternal darkness. And so he concludes the psalm with the final radical contrast to the world's attitude when he says, "People who have wealth but lack understanding are like beasts that perish. The rich who don't understand that God is the creator and Lord of the universe, and who therefore don't trust their lives to him, are actually to be pitied, because for all their wealth, for all their power and influence, in the end they are no better off than sheep." See verse 14 as well, which live only to be slaughtered and eaten. Well, there you have it. Psalm 49, a psalm that speaks to all people about the folly of trusting in wealth, and also in how those who trust in God should not fear or envy the wealthy. And yet, in another sense, it seems strangely incomplete. Yes, we're told that the psalmist doesn't fear death because he trusts that God will redeem his life from the grave, but we don't have any idea how he will do this. We also have the very intriguing reference in verse 8, which says, "The ransom for a life is costly." What does this mean? Well, here we have an advantage over the author, in that we are living after the death and resurrection of Jesus. The psalmist was left in a dilemma that he knew the cost of ransoming a life was high, very high, and yet somehow he also trusted that God would save his life from the grave. Well, we know that the cost of ransoming the lives of people who trust in God was high, very high. It took nothing less than the death of God's own Son on the cross and his resurrection on the third day to pay the price to enable us to live forever with God. So since Jesus is the means by which we can be redeemed from the grave, we can have confidence that the words of Jesus in Luke 12:32-33, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Just think about those words, that the kingdom, a treasure in heaven that will never fail. I think one of the biggest problems we have is a lack of appreciation of eternal life. Heaven, eternal life, the kingdom often seem abstract, whereas money, possessions, wealth, they seem so real, so concrete. But if anything, the reverse is true. Heaven is the ultimate reality. Money, possessions, wealth are but shadows of that ultimate reality. In C.S. Lewis's book, The Last Battle, one of the characters describes heaven like this: "I have come home at last. This is my real country. I belong here. This is the land I've been looking for all my life, though I never knew it till now." The reason we love the old Narnia is that sometimes it looked a little like this. The ransom for a life, our lives, to redeem us from the realm of the dead and take us to be with God forever, was costly. But we didn't pay the cost. It was an act of amazing grace. So let's finish our service with that great old hymn, Amazing Grace.